Let's take a look here at the 2017 Micro FRQ number 1. Share my screen. All right, here we are. So we've got corn is used as food and also as an input in the production of ethanol, an alternative fuel. Assume corn is produced in a perfectly competitive market. All right, so parts A and B here are going to be sort of a graph. So let's read through and then we'll go through and get a larger sheet where I can draw. So draw correctly labeled side-by-side graphs for the corn market and a representative corn farmer. So that should jump out to you as a perfectly competitive market graph. And of course, they gave us that already before. On your graph, show each of the following. Okay, equilibrium price and quantity in the corn market. Label PM and QM. The profit maximizing quantity of corn produced by the representative farmer earning zero economic profit, labeled QF. So that's important to know. That you should, I mean, those are characteristics of the perfectly competitive market to begin with. And then we're going to go ahead and take a peek at B, because we're going to show the same, show the answer to B on the same graph. So assume the demand for ethanol increases, right? So ethanol up above was corn as an input in the production of ethanol. So the demand for ethanol increases, and then on your graph, show what will happen to each of the following in the short run. Market price and quantity of corn. So we have a market shift that's going to happen on the left side of the graph, and then what's going on with the representative corn farmer on the right. So either profit or loss, depending upon what happens from the market shift. Okay, so remember all that. We're going to go find sketchpad. All right, need to erase what's up. Okay, so let's start with the first part, which was draw the perfectly competitive market for corn, and then a representative farmer off to the right. So we've got, let's use blue. All right, market graph's going to be over here. And then let's go to the side. Okay, so we have market. Let's just write corn. And we've got corn farmer. All right, so first things first, let's draw our market, supply and demand. So we've got supply, and that's our first demand. Okay, so let's come down. And they wanted us to label this QM. Okay, equilibrium, price, also PM. Okay, now we come across, right? So this is our Mr. DARP coming across, right? So we're going to label this margin revenue curve 1. You know, if you want to think about demand curve, average revenue, and also price, right? That's your Mr. DARP coming across in a perfectly competitive market. Okay, so now we got to have the representative corn farmer, and we are in equilibrium, right? In a perfectly competitive market, nobody is making any economic profit, right? So we're going to draw, average total cost curve. This should kind of touch here. Let's thicken this up just to make that clear. All right, and then we've got marginal cost curve comes through the minimum point there. Okay, so we have a corn farmer here. The price, Mr. DARP coming across, is at the low point there of the average total cost curve. All right, MR equals MC right here. And then we're going to come down. And they wanted this labeled the quantity sub F for the farmer. Okay, so that's your set market. That's what's going on. Everything's at equilibrium. Then we had part B, where all of a sudden there is a shift in increased demand for ethanol, right? Now corn is used in the production of ethanol. So corn being an input, right? The corn market is going to be affected by the increase in demand for ethanol. So how does that show up in the market? Well, we have a new demand. So an outward shift in the demand curve. for corn because corn is an input for ethanol. All right, so let's label our new equilibrium points. So they wanted this labeled Q star, and you can see how the quantity of corn has increased. And we'll come across, same thing, it was P star. And you can see how the price of corn has increased due to this demand increase for ethanol. Okay, it's kind of a crooked line, but you get the idea. And then we got to come across Mr. DARP, right? We're going to call this margin around the curve 2 because we have a new price, average revenue and price demand that the average farmer is facing. Okay, so now we got to figure out where this farmer is going to produce, right? So MR, which is Mr. DARP up here, equals MC. So we find that point. Okay, so let's come down. That's going to be labeled QF2. QF2, right? So we see how the quantity has increased. In this case, not very much, but a little bit. And now we want to shade the economic profit or loss. So we go to revenue, right? So price times quantity is going to be our revenue, but we have to subtract out cost, right? So we follow this down to the average total cost curve where that intersects, come across here, and then shade this whole area, right? We don't need to calculate it. We just need to shade it on the graph. All right, so we have the situation where farmers were making no economic profit initially. We had a huge shift in the demand curve due to the change in ethanol demand, which altered the market price over here. And all of a sudden, we have the average corn farmer making a pretty hefty economic profit. All right, so that should be parts A and B on your graph. Let's go back to the question now. Okay, so we did all of this. All right, let's go to part C. Scroll down so we have some space. All right, relative to your answer in part B, state what will happen to the market equilibrium price and quantity of corn in the long run. Okay, so we saw all of a sudden a corn farmer was making a pretty hefty economic profit, right? And what happens in perfectly competitive markets in the long run? Well, they don't make economic profits, right? So the reason they don't is because corn farmers or potential corn farmers will see that economic profit. They will jump in, start planting corn, or they may be farmers of a different crop, and they all of a sudden start planting corn instead of whatever other crop they have. So all said, the supply of corn is going to shift outward, right? Eventually in the long run. So we want to know what happens to price and quantity to corn with this secondary shift in supply. So if you're not sure, right, just draw a quick graph, right? So initially, so we had demand came out here. So we were at this point, right? This price and this quantity is where we were. Now, supply, right? This is our supply curve. This is our second demand curve, first demand curve. Supply is going to respond in the long run, right? So let's shift supply out that way. All right, so you see price, let's call that price 2, and quantity 2. So quantity increased, right? The quantity moved out because the supply curve shifted out, and price came down. So in this explanation, you should say something, due to this increase in supply because corn farmers are making economic profit. And then eventually you're going to get to, let's see, price is going to decrease due to this shift in supply, and the quantity is going to increase due to this shift in supply. Just make sure you have sort of a sentence or two there kind of explaining that shift in supply. And the reason is because it's easy to enter the market, right? Because it's a perfectly competitive market. And as corn farmers are making economic profit, people are going to be attracted to that market and start planting corn. Okay, so let's go to part D now. Soybeans are produced in a perfectly competitive market. Assume farmers can grow either corn or soybeans on the same land. These are substitutes, right? What happens to the price of soybeans in the next planting season if the price of corn increases? And again, explain. Okay, so this is sort of a logic walk through the economic logic, what's going on here. So we have the price of corn increased, right? So we had that in the first example, in the first graph. People are going to, if you can have either corn or soybeans, you're going to plant whatever is most profitable, right? So let's just say the price of corn is significantly higher than soybeans. Well, as many farmers as possibly can, right? They're going to say at the beginning of the season, hey, should I plant corn or should I plant soybeans? Well, they're going to look at the market data. They're going to find, well, the price of corn is significantly higher. I could make a better profit with corn instead of soybeans. So they're going to shift land from soybeans to corn if they can. And that, we talked about the increase in supply of corn in the previous part of this question. So if it stands to reason, right, if resources and land is being used to move away from soybeans into corn, the supply for the next year of soybeans is decreasing, right? Because we're using that land to produce corn instead of soybeans. Okay, so they're interested in what happens to the price. Well, if you were to sketch out a quick graph, a supply of anything shifts left, right? Supply decrease. The price of that good is going to increase. Okay, so that's sort of a 2-sentence explanation saying that, but the price increased, and the reason is because the supply of soybeans is going to decrease because farmers are shifting away from soybeans and towards corn. Okay, so part E. Assume instead that the government sets a binding price ceiling in the corn market. Draw a new correctly labeled graph for the corn market and show each of the following. Binding price ceiling and the quantity purchased by consumers in the corn market labeled Q sub P. Okay, so this one is just really draw out a sketch of the corn market with a price ceiling. Okay, so we have price, we have quantity. Okay, so we've got supply curve, we've got demand curve. All right, so let's use a different color. Price ceiling, right? So the ceiling is down below the, so I'm just going to label it here. And over here, they wanted it labeled P sub C. Go back to my color. And then they want to know the quantity purchased by consumers in the corn market, Q sub P. All right, so at this price, right, the only people willing to supply at this price, you got to go on the supply curve and see where those intersect. Now, this is going to tell you your quantity, right? That's the only amount that's going to be produced in the market. So they want that labeled Q sub P. All right, so that's essentially as far as you had to go for this question. I'm going to go a little bit further here just to talk briefly about consumer and producer surplus and deadweight loss in this question, even though it's not asked. So producer surplus, right, would be this triangle down here. These people would have sold at a lower price, but they got this price, so they were happy, right? So this area here is the producer surplus. Now, if we stay on this quantity, let's just dot this up here. Only this many consumers can consume the quantity of corn, right? Because you can't go beyond the quantity that's actually produced in the market. So this area up here is consumer surplus, right? So you go on the demand curve, these people would have paid a much higher price and they got this price down here. So they're very happy, but these people would have paid above the price, but they couldn't get it, right? Because they could only go up to this quantity. Okay, so, and then deadweight loss, let's go, should be this area in here. All right, there you have a price ceiling and just a little extra there. It wasn't asked for in this question, but I just wanted to shade those in there.